The Prairie Storytellers Guild presents a festival of lies. Now I imagine that some of you are people who have attended our Liars Contest in the past, and we miss you, and we're offering you this gift in place of our annual Liars Contest. But I imagine some of you are new, and so welcome. Welcome to the Prairie Storytellers Guild. We are centered in Peoria, Illinois.
Who can kick a football from here to Afghanistan? I can. Who fought those tigers in the street while everyone ran and hid? Who? I did. I did. And who will fly with X-ray eyes? A drone. Who?
You.
I will. And who could tell lies all day and night? Storytellers might. Now that is from a poem, part of a poem from the book Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shelf Silverstein. And Shelf Silverstein, Mr. Silverstein, couldn't be here. He died in 1975. Enough poems. Let's hear from storytellers.
As Marilyn said, you might hear quite a few lies here. But these tellers, they're going to try to convince you that they're telling you the truth. So I'm going to teach you how to be a lie detector. Here are the signs to look for. If one of the tellers is touching his or her face, that's a sure sign that he or she is lying. Or fiddling with his or her hair, that would be another clue. Or if they start to perspire on their brow, that would be a clue that they are lying. And if you see that their gestures do not match their words, that is a sign that they're lying for sure. Well, the first teller, someone who has a reputation of being a liar, has trophies to prove it. Welcome, Kay Price.
With this pandemic, I have really become worried about the older, widowed women in my life. I try to send them a note or I try to give them a phone call, but one that comes to mind is my Aunt Barb. Now, Aunt Barb and Uncle John live in Nebraska on a farm that they've lived all their married lives. They're up in the years, and Uncle John last November sat in his recliner and passed away quietly in his sleep. But before that, my Uncle John and my Aunt Barb in their later years for exercise would walk out to the pond in the back of the property. And they'd carry a little pail and take Yogi the dog, and they'd sit on the dock and they would throw fish pellets out into the pond. And the fish would come and they'd flap their tails and they would wiggle and waggle. And Uncle John always said it was like they were saying hello to him. But in the fall, too, the ducks would come on their migration and they would all land on the pond, and sometimes the whole pond would be full of ducks. My Uncle John loved that place, and every day he would go, if Barb would go or not, he would take his walk to the pond and walk back. He said to my Aunt Barb, "When I pass from this world now, I want you to scatter my ashes on this pond because it's my favorite place." And she said she would. I called my Aunt Barb and I said, "How are you doing, Aunt Barb, with this pandemic? It's the craziest thing." She said, "Well, The girls are good to me. They have 5 girls. And it's Janie and Josephine and Julie and Janice and Debbie. And how Debbie got her name, I could tell you a whole story about that. She said they've been good to me, but as soon as they closed everything down, they called me and said, Mom, you're not to leave the farm. Josephine, they call her Joe, is going to bring you your groceries and we'll call you, but you can't go to the senior center. She said it didn't matter. They closed the senior center. You can't go to quilting. It didn't matter. They stopped all the women's activities at church. And you can't go to bingo. My Aunt Barb said that was the saddest of all. But she stayed home, and Joe would come once a week with her groceries, and they would sit and visit. Josephine always wore her mask. And so Barb says, but I do have a story I want to tell you. March was bad, she said, and the weather was kind of cold. But when April came, I got really lonesome. I was missing my good husband, John, and one day I just took that cedar box that his ashes were in and I sat it on the kitchen table. And we had the longest talk. And she said, I did most of the talking, but that wasn't unusual in that house. And he kind of had said to her through that whole conversation that he would like to be laid to rest. Now, she knew that the ice had finally melted off the pond, and she hadn't been there in quite a while. And so she and Yogi and the cedar box went to the pond that day. She said she sat there on the dock for the longest time, and then a big breeze came up, and she took that box and she lifted it into the air, and the wind caught those ashes, and they spread all over the pond. She said a sense of peace came upon her, and when she got back home, she started cleaning the house. She cleaned that shelf that hadn't been dusted since November, and she cleaned out his side of the closet. He had way too many overhauls in there. And she cleaned out his chore closet, and she washed up the coats, and she packed them up for the relief agencies, and she said she was feeling really good and industrious. And the very next day, Josephine called and said, Mom, the girls and I have decided that now that the weather's warmed and the pond has lost its ice, that we're all going to get together on Saturday, and we're going to come down and we're going to help you pass his ashes to the pond. Now, Barb said, I wanted to tell her right then and there that it had already taken place, but she didn't let me have a word in edgewise before she said, and don't worry about lunch, Mom. We're bringing fried chicken and potato salad. Now, my Aunt Barb had not had any fried chicken since January at the senior center. And she loved fried chicken, and she was not going to miss this opportunity, she said. So she didn't say a word. And she started thinking about the girls coming on Saturday. Janice and Debbie from Omaha, and Julie from Lincoln, and Joe and Janie were right there in the area, and they would have a great day. And then she remembered there's no ashes in the cedar box. So she fussed about it a little bit, and then she got in the pantry that evening and found a whole box of mashed potato flakes, the instant kind. So she dumped them into the cedar box, and she looked in there and she thought, it doesn't look quite right. So she thought some more, and she went out on the porch and she took that pail and she got 2 handfuls of those fish pellets. And it gave the box just the right heft and just about the right color, and it was environmentally friendly too, she thought. That morning she got up and she said she put on her best everyday shirt, and she put on all of her underwear this time, and she curled her hair and she put on a little bit of makeup, and she was all ready when the girls came. And they all got out of their cars and they gave each other the air hugs, she said, and then some of them did the foot bumps and the elbow bumps, and it was so good to see the girls all together. And she took the cedar box and she and Yogi started down the path. She had given Jane the leaf blower because there was no breeze that day. And they went down to the pond, and they all stood on the dock, and each of the girls had a letter they had written to their dad, and they read the letter. And there was memories, and there was good things, and there was things to laugh about, and there was tears. Everybody in a mask, wiping their eyes. And then they all said a prayer together, and then she said it was time. So she took the lid off the cedar box and held it just above their eye level so they couldn't peek in. And then Jane pulled the cord on the leaf blower, and John always kept that leaf blower running good. And it took off with the first pull. And Jane pushed it down, or pointed it down into that box, and the ashes, so-called ashes, flew up into the air. Barb said it was if there was poetry in motion right there. For there, the potato flakes had suspended in the air while the pellets fell with a splitter splatter into the water. She said if we could have only held on to that moment. But immediately the fish in the pond recognized that noise, that sound, and they came dashing to that area, and they began to bubble up and stir up, and you could see their mouths and you could see their tails, and she looked around, and the girls all had their mouths hanging open, she could tell, because their masks were extended, and she was afraid the elastic would break on their ears. And then she looked back, and the potato flakes had now laid upon the pond water and turned white. And that turning and churning of the water and that frenzy of that feeding had caused those potato flakes to now absorb that water and turn into mashed potatoes. And she didn't know quite what to think, and she looked at the girls, and they were still aghast. No one knew what to say. And just then, a flock of ducks came over, and they circled once, and they landed right on the center of the pond, and they began to devour those mashed potato flakes. Finally, Janice said, "Mom, I don't know what's going on here." And all my Aunt Barb said was, all I could think about was that fried chicken getting cold up there at the house. So I just said, well, your dad loved them fish, and he liked those ducks. So I guess this is a good end, and let's go have some fried chicken and mashed potatoes before that chicken gets cold. And she and Yogi in the cedar box started back to the house.
Thank you, Kay. Our next teller is new to the guild. His name is Mark Doolittle. So I don't know if he's going to tell you a true story. Maybe not, I'm not sure. See what he has to say.
My Grandpa John was a quiet man who didn't say very much very often, and I don't ever recall seeing him smile very often or hearing him laugh. But he was a very good listener, and he seemed to have a really good understanding of people. Grandpa John was a small man, small frame and thin, and he had these dark gray eyes that seemed to have a circle around the pupils. And he also had a dull blue tattoo on his right forearm. If you ever asked him about that dull blue tattoo, he never wanted to talk about it, and he would cover it up with his other hand and change the subject on you. The dull blue tattoo was of a young woman, and she was imprinted on his arm so that she faced up towards his, and he could look down into her face. And she had a small feather headdress on her head, and I remembered one time hearing Grandpa John refer to her as the Indian Princess. Now, Grandpa John was the only boy on a small 25-acre dairy farm outside of a major city in Iowa. And because he was the only boy on the farm, he had a lot of chores and responsibilities. Grandpa John's father was a stern man who had a lot of strict rules and enforced those rules with a leather belt. Now, Grandpa John only made it through the 4th grade, and then he had to end his school career so he could spend his time working on the farm. His father told him one time, "You're not going to amount to much, John, So you just better find something to work with that's a little bit dumber than you are, like the animals here on this farm. When Grandpa John was about 13 one day, one of his good friends came running up the lane at the farm, yelling and hollering for him. John met him, and his friend told him, "John, my pa's taking me to the last day of the circus tomorrow in the big city, and we want to know if you can come with us." John looked at his friend and said, "You know my dad would never allow me to go to the circus tomorrow. I won't be able to do that." But his friend was persistent and said, "Well, what's it hurt to ask, John? Let's at least give it a try." Well, John's father heard all this commotion going on and walked up to see what the boys might be talking about. When he got there, John turned to him and respectfully and quietly said, "Dad, my friend and his father are going to the last day of the circus tomorrow in the big city, and they asked if I might go along with them. Can I go?" John's father looked down at him and boldly said to him, "John, you know you have a lot of chores and responsibilities to get done here tomorrow, and we can't afford to have you go to the silly, crazy circus anyway. So no, you will not be going to that circus tomorrow." And then, later that day in the evening, when John was heading up to the house to get ready to go to bed, his father met him halfway there and gave him a whooping so bad that John couldn't sleep that night. As he lay in his bed, he got to thinking, and he devised a plan. What he did was, before the sun rose in the early morning, he snuck out of the farmhouse and snuck over to his friend's house. And he told them, "My father changed his mind. I can go with the circus with you today." And when they got to the circus, it was a splendid place, unlike anything John had ever seen before. There was a big circus tent, and there were animal acts, and there were clowns everywhere, and people all over the place. And John had the most exciting and fun day of his life. But when he got home that night from the circus, he also got the worst whooping of his life from his father, and he was sent to the barn to go to sleep that night. Laying in the hay, John realized, "I'm not going to put up with this anymore." And so in the middle of the night, he got up and snuck out of that barn and started the long journey back to the big city. When he got to the circus grounds that morning, it was a lot different than it had been the day before on the happiest day of his life. You see, the circus was being taken down and packed up and loaded onto a train to move on to the next big city. And John wasn't sure what to do, but he just decided to start helping out with that process. So he started packing up and rolling up large tent ropes and loading up wooden shipping crates and helping stuff get ready to get loaded onto that train. By the end of that day, John had become a member of the Fibbing Brothers Traveling Circus. Now, as a member of the circus, he got to meet a lot of interesting circus people. And it was a very short period of time before they started to really like John, to the point where they even nicknamed him Little Johnny. And some of those circus people were very interesting characters. There was a tightrope walker. He was a big man, about 300 pounds, and from Bulgaria. And his name was Bomsweo. And Bomsweo had these short, stubby legs, and he wore a bright orange and blue and yellow leotard. Imagine that up on that tightrope. One day, little Johnny realized that Bomsweo never completely finished his tightrope act, and he asked Bomsweo why. Little Johnny heard the story from Bomsweo, who explained, "Well, little Johnny, I used to climb that ladder to go up to the first platform for my performance, and I never had a problem going up the ladder because I was always looking up. And when I reached that platform and got out on the rope, well, I never had a problem there either because I could see my adoring fans clapping and cheering for me down below. But then I realized that at the other platform at the end of the tightrope was a rickety, broken, beat-up old ladder that I would have to go down at the end of my performance. And that old beat-up ladder just scared the bejesus out of me. And I didn't want to have to go down that old ladder. So what I would do is I'd get halfway out on the tightrope, and then I would stagger and sway a little. And then, as the crowd would scream in horror, I'd drop off the rope yelling, "Bombs away-o!" on my way down into the net. Little Johnny learned from Bombsueo that sometimes success can be disguised as failure. And then there was Irwin Hanna at the circus. He was the man that took care of all the different animals for the circus. And he explained to Johnny one time how circus animals have their own personalities, and many times those personalities are a lot like people. There was Tiny the elephant. Now, Tiny was big and slow-moving, but Tiny also knew that she was the star of the show. And Irwin Hanna explained to little Johnny that Tiny, like many people who want to be the center of attraction, are many times really just full of a whole lot of poop. And then there was the monkeys. The monkeys were named Davy and Peter and Michael and Mickey. And those crazy hairy beasts were rambunctious and always causing trouble and always getting into things. Little Johnny learned from Irwin Hanna that many times those people that are getting into trouble and stuff like that can just never really be trusted. And then there were the boxing kangaroos, Frazier and Foreman. Those boxing kangaroos were awkward and quirky, and they smelled funny too. But Irwin Hanna explained to little Johnny that those boxing kangaroos were incredibly smart. They knew how to throw punches at each other, looking like they were hitting each other viciously during the fight, but they really weren't hitting each other at all. And they always knew who was going to win the fight before the performance even started. Irwin Hanna taught little Johnny that the animals at the zoo are like many people. They put on a performance. They put on a show in front of people. But the best way to get to truly know them was to see what they're like behind the curtain. And then there was the Indian princess. The Indian princess was a fortune teller and faith healer with the circus. And she came from an American Indian tribe way out west. And also, like little Johnny, came from a troubled family background. She had people come to see her every single day to tell her their hopes, their dreams, their desires, and their wishes. And the Indian princess would many times tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. But there are other times where she wouldn't tell them what they wanted to hear. And that was the case with little Johnny. You see, little Johnny had fallen madly in love with the Indian princess shortly after he met her. But the Indian princess had to tell little Johnny that their love story was never meant to be. But she also told him one other thing. She told little Johnny that he was a very special person. And the reason she told him that was because she didn't think that anyone else had ever told him that before. Well, my Grandpa John was also very special to me.
Thank you, Mark, for that story about your Grandpa John. Our next teller comes from the farm. Welcome, Jack Stevens.
You know, as a farmer, probably springtime is one of my favorite times of year. And you know, probably the month of May especially is the most beautiful time. One of my favorite things to do is on a Sunday afternoon, take a walk out through the pasture just to see the wildflowers. You know, the Dutchman's breeches, the Trillium, the Jack-in-the-Pulpits and the Sweet Williams. And even once in a while I get a chance, I'll find a good mess of mushrooms out there while I'm out there. Well, this one day while I was out there walking in the pasture, I was up on the side of the hill there kind of looking across the valley. There was some calves playing down there in the valley. Moms were standing over there eating grass not too far away. But something caught my eye. I couldn't figure out what it was. And coming out of the fence row up by the cornfield, I saw a turtle. Now this turtle, what they do, the turtle will go up there along the fence row in the springtime, and they'll dig a hole, and they'll lay their eggs in that hole. They cover them up, and they let the sun do the incubating on them, and then they go back to the creek. They're done. All they do is lay their eggs, and they're done. Well, this turtle was lumbering down the hill, just starting down the hill, got about a third of the way down, and over on the other side of that hill, coming around the corner, there was a raccoon. Well, that raccoon was hungry, hunting for something to eat, and all of a sudden, he stumbled onto that turtle that was coming down that hill, and he thought, man, have I got it made. And so he went after that turtle. Well, that turtle is still kind of lumbering along, trying to get away, you know. And that raccoon come up to him and tried to get to him. Of course, that raccoon's smart enough to stay away from that head, because that snapping turtle will get a hold of him if he could. And so he stays away, and he keeps circling that turtle, and that turtle's still lumbering along, trying to get down to the creek. And pretty soon, that raccoon flips that turtle over, got his paw under him and flipped him over on his back. Well, now all of a sudden, that turtle has got to stick his neck out one way and his tail out the other. Only way he can right himself. So he gets himself up there, he flips himself over, so he's back up on his feet again, but in the process, the raccoon grabbed him by the tail. He got that tail, and that turtle is fighting, trying to get a hold of that raccoon, can't get him. And they fought, and they rolled on that hill. Down the hill they were rolling, and finally the turtle gave in. He was done. He was all wore out, couldn't go anymore. So this raccoon figured, I've got it made now. So the raccoon did what a raccoon will do. He took that turtle down to the creek to wash off his meal. He was going to wash that turtle off so he'd have his meal. Well, when that turtle got down there, he felt that wet mud under his feet, and he was home. And he went clawing for the water, and he went down into the water, dragging that raccoon with him, and there was the water just splashing and churned around. What a fight I watched in the water. Well, that turtle was bound determined he wasn't coming up out of that water, and that coon could only hold his breath for so long. Pretty soon, it all got still, and I saw that turtle moving in the water, going upstream. And on the other bank, I saw this raccoon trying to get out of the water, completely wore out. But he was still alive. He made it, but he was still hungry. And he, you know, in nature, they even find out there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Well, Jack, that's a tall tale for sure. Our next storyteller is Alan Gardiner-Atkinson, and he's going to tell you all about his travels all around the world.
Hello, my name is E. Howard Hunt, the former CIA operative, best known for my participation in the 1972 burglary of the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. Years ago, I took a vow never to reveal government secrets, but I've just found out that WikiLeaks has hacked all the CIA computers, and this story's about to become public anyway, so I feel I can betray my trust without any moral scruples. Understand, this story is not political. I gave up politics after I got out of prison. Politics was what got me in trouble in the first place. I merely want to set the historical record straight. As for politics these days, I like to eat ice cream with my friends, so I guess that makes me an ice cream socialist. Many of you may remember the 1970 Moscow summit meeting between American President Richard Nixon and the Soviet Secretary General Leonid Brezhnev. Historians generally agree that Nixon and his Secretary of State Henry Kissinger were quite successful in these negotiations. They concluded the first Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, got many concessions on trade, and they helped American farmers by selling millions of tons of wheat and grain to the Soviets. But despite these successes, there was one thing Richard Nixon wanted very, very badly that he did not get. He could not get the Kremlin secret recipe for borscht. I remember the day that CIA Director Richard Helms called me into his office. When I arrived, the president was with him. The president said, "Mr. Hunt, you may have heard about our success at the summit in Moscow. And we did accomplish a lot. But there was one thing that we wanted very, very badly that we did not accomplish. You see, on the first night there, at the official state dinner, the Russians served us a fantastic portion of borscht. I mean, this borscht was wonderful, the best borscht I've ever had. And later that night, before we went to bed, my wife, Pat, said to me, "Dick, see if you can get that recipe for borscht from the Russians tomorrow." So the next day, during the negotiations, right after we talked about Vietnam and Berlin, I asked the Secretary General if he would share with me the recipe for borscht so that my wife, Pat, could serve it at the White House and impress our dignitaries and my fellow Americans who sometimes came and dined with us. But Leonid Brezhnev became outraged and he said, "How could you expect us to give up such important state secrets? You must be insane." And I could not get the recipe. I offered him unilateral nuclear weapons reductions. I offered senators baseball tickets for the whole season to his embassy staff in Washington. I even offered to send them American laundry detergent so they could actually get their clothes clean. But that dirty commie rat would not give up the recipe. Then Director Helms said to me, "Hunt, you're the only man for this job. You must get inside the Kremlin kitchen and steal the recipe for borscht." Well, I was not happy with this assignment. Working behind the Iron Curtain was always tricky business. But I went to the CIA supply closet and I got out some of the CIA super secret, super silent plastic explosive, a false mustache, a Communist Party lapel pin that was actually a microphone in disguise, recording device, and the last thing I took, just in case capture was imminent, a cyanide pill so I wouldn't be tortured. Well, I boarded a submarine in Pensacola, Florida, and it was dropped off on the coast of Finland near the Russian border. Using a false passport, I entered the Soviet Union by train. When I arrived in Moscow, the next day, I found a collective farm worker pushing a cart of vegetables down the street, a two-wheeled cart. I drugged him and stole his cart and took it to the Kremlin kitchen door. When I arrived at the door, the chief chef himself met me and was outraged. "Why have you taken so long to get here? I need these vegetables to make borscht for the Politburo meeting. If it is not done in time, they may send me to Gulag Archipelago." He and his assistant took the cart away and took it inside and left me all alone to look around the kitchen. I found an office with a wall safe. I thought, that would be a good place to hide the recipes. I took the CIA super secret, super silent plastic explosive and blew this door off the safe. And inside was a file box. In that file box was not only the recipe for borscht, but for all the Kremlin culinary delicacies. I took the lapel pin camera and photographed every recipe. And as I was about to leave, I heard voices outside. It was Leonid Brezhnev himself saying, "I tell you, Boris, there is an American spy in the building. I know they're after the borscht." And then I heard their top agent, Boris Badenov, say, Comrade Chairman, this sounds like a mission for which Americans would send moose and squirrel. I hid under the desk until they'd gone by the room, and then I decided to make a break for it. I dashed out of the office, through the kitchen, and out into the courtyard, where I came to a sudden stop. There in front of me was their most beautiful agent, Natasha, and 2 other KBG agents, and they all had AK-47s pointed right at me. I knew if I were captured, I'd be tortured unmercifully, so I took the cyanide pill and was just about to pop it into my mouth, when suddenly I heard the clatter of hooves, and into the courtyard came Bullwinkle the moose, and he impaled Natasha on his horns and trampled the other 2 KBG agents. Then Rocky the flying squirrel came over the wall and said, "Quick, Hunt, grab my paw." And we went flying over the wall and across the city to a safe house on the far side of Moscow. I spent the night there and exfiltrated the country the next day. So I got back to Washington. Pat Nixon got her recipe for borscht and all the other Kremlin recipes, and the CIA gave me a medal for distinguished service. And while I'm here, I do want to apologize for that little misunderstanding at the Watergate Hotel a couple of years later.
Well, that's our tellers. We hope you enjoyed our Festival of Lies. I have one more piece of advice for you. If at first you don't deceive, lie again.